Imagine doctors declaring someone dead, only for that person to wake up hours later. Or a plant that can count numbers without having a brain. Or a material so thin it's basically two-dimensional, yet stronger than steel. These sound like science fiction. But they're all real. For years scientists insisted these things were impossible. Until reality proved them wrong. And the last one on this list might completely change how you think about the limits of human biology. 10. The day death stopped being final. For most of modern history, medicine had a clear rule. If the heart stopped beating, life was over. After just a few minutes without oxygen, the brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. At least, that's what doctors believed. Then strange survival stories began appearing in extremely cold places. Rescuers occasionally pulled people from icy lakes who had been underwater for long periods of time. Some had no detectable heartbeat. But after their bodies were slowly warmed, something incredible happened. Their hearts started beating again. One of the most famous cases occurred in Sweden in 1999. A woman became trapped in freezing snow and her body temperature dropped to about 13 degrees Celsius. Her heart had stopped for over 2 hours. Under normal conditions, survival would have been impossible. Yet when doctors carefully warmed her body, she regained consciousness. And even more surprising, she recovered with almost no lasting brain damage. Scientists eventually realized the cold had slowed her metabolism so dramatically that it acted like a biological pause button. Today doctors use controlled cooling during certain medical procedures. Because sometimes the best way to save a life is to slow it down. 9. Lightning that shoots into space. For decades, airline pilots kept reporting something strange during thunderstorms. High above the storm clouds, they sometimes saw massive red flashes lighting up the sky. These glowing shapes looked like giant jellyfish made of electricity. But scientists were skeptical. Lightning travels down toward the ground. It doesn't shoot upward. Many researchers assumed the pilots were mistaken. Or seeing optical illusions. Then in 1989, a low-light camera captured something shocking. A gigantic electrical burst shot upward from a thunderstorm. The phenomenon was real. Scientists later named these mysterious flashes sprites. Sprites are enormous electrical discharges that occur high above storm clouds, reaching altitudes of nearly 100 kilometers. They happen incredibly fast, sometimes lasting less than 1,000th of a second. Which is why they remained hidden for so long. Even today, researchers are still studying exactly how these giant bursts form. But one thing became clear. Thunderstorms are doing far more above our heads than anyone ever imagined. 8. Hearing a meteor before the sound arrives. Now imagine standing outside on a quiet night. Suddenly a bright fireball streaks across the sky. At the exact same moment you see it, you hear a faint crackling or hissing sound. This shouldn't happen. Sound travels far slower than light. If a meteor explodes dozens of kilometers above Earth, the sound should arrive minutes later. For years scientists assumed witnesses were imagining things. But researchers eventually discovered something fascinating. As a meteor burns through the atmosphere, it can generate intense electromagnetic energy. Those electromagnetic waves can cause nearby objects, like hair, glasses, or even leaves, to vibrate. Those tiny vibrations create sound right next to the observer. So people weren't hearing the meteor itself. They were hearing objects around them acting like miniature speakers. In other words, space rocks were secretly turning the environment into a sound system. And the next discovery almost sounds even stranger. Because it involves a plant that can count numbers. 7. The plant that can count. Most people assume memory requires a brain. But one small carnivorous plant challenges that idea. The Venus flytrap doesn't immediately close when something touches it. Instead, it waits. If one tiny hair inside the trap is triggered, the plant does nothing. But if a second touch occurs within about 20 seconds, the trap snaps shut instantly. That means the plant remembers the first signal and combines it with the second. And it gets even more interesting. Scientists discovered that the more an insect struggles inside the trap, the more digestive enzymes the plant produces. The plant is basically gathering information and adjusting its behavior. Without a brain. Without neurons. Just a plant, doing basic calculations. 6. A material that shouldn't exist. For decades, physics textbooks claimed that a sheet of material only 1 atom thick could not exist in a stable form. It would simply collapse. But in 2004, 2 researchers decided to experiment with graphite, the material found in pencil lead. Using ordinary adhesive tape, they peeled layer after layer from a small graphite sample. Eventually they isolated a sheet of carbon atoms arranged in a honeycomb structure. Just 1 atom thick. This material became known as graphene. And it turned out to be extraordinary. Graphene is incredibly strong, roughly 200 times stronger than steel. It's flexible, transparent, and an excellent conductor of electricity. The discovery earned the researchers a Nobel Prize and launched an entirely new field of materials science. All from something discovered with tape and pencil graphite. 5. The bacteria that eats plastic. Plastic waste has become one of the biggest environmental challenges on Earth. Many plastics can take centuries to break down naturally. But in 2016, scientists studying a recycling facility in Japan noticed something unusual. Some plastic samples seemed to be slowly degrading. The culprit turned out to be a newly discovered bacterium called Ideonella sakaiensis. This microbe produces enzymes capable of breaking down PET plastic, the material used in many water bottles. The bacteria literally turn plastic into food. Although the process is still relatively slow, researchers are studying how these enzymes could help reduce plastic pollution. It's a reminder that life on Earth can sometimes evolve solutions to problems humans create. 4. Humans with 2 sets of DNA. Most people assume every cell in their body carries the same DNA. But in rare cases, that isn't true. Some individuals are biological chimeras. This happens when 2 embryos merge early in development. The result is a single person with cells from 2 different genetic sources. In one famous case, a woman failed a DNA test meant to confirm she was the mother of her own children. The results suggested the children belonged to someone else. But further investigation revealed something extraordinary. Some of her organs contained DNA from an absorbed twin sibling. Meaning, genetically speaking, part of her body belonged to someone else entirely. 3. Restarting a silent brain. For decades doctors believed that severe brain damage was irreversible. If certain neural circuits stopped functioning, they were gone for good. But a groundbreaking experiment challenged that belief. In 2016, a man who had been minimally conscious for months after a traumatic brain injury received an experimental treatment. Scientists used focused ultrasound to stimulate a deep brain region called the thalamus. Within days, the patient began responding to commands. Soon he could communicate and feed himself. The discovery suggested that some brains aren't permanently damaged. They might simply be stuck in a dormant state, waiting for the right signal. 2. Unboiling an egg. There's an old saying that some things can't be undone. Like unboiling an egg. When eggs cook, the proteins inside them unfold and tangle together. For centuries scientists believed this process was irreversible. But researchers eventually developed a technique that can separate and refold these tangled proteins. The method uses special chemicals and high-speed centrifuges to restore the proteins to their original structure. The goal isn't culinary. It's pharmaceutical. This technique can help scientists recover valuable proteins used to manufacture medicines. Sometimes breakthroughs happen in the most unexpected places. Even in a boiled egg. 1. Helping the blind see. For thousands of years, certain forms of inherited blindness were considered permanent. If someone was born without functioning retinal cells, there was no treatment. But recent advances in gene therapy have begun changing that. Scientists developed treatments that deliver healthy genes directly into the eye using modified viruses. In some patients, the therapy restored the ability to detect light and movement. And technology is pushing even further. Researchers have created artificial retinal implants, tiny electronic devices that convert visual information into signals sent directly to the brain. For people who had never seen before, these devices allow them to perceive shapes, objects, and even read large letters. Imagine seeing the moon for the first time after a lifetime of darkness. Moments like that show how far science has come. History shows that the word impossible rarely lasts forever in science. Again and again, discoveries force us to rethink what we believed was true. What seems impossible today might simply be something we don't understand yet. And somewhere right now, scientists are probably discovering the next impossible thing. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing for more fascinating science stories. Because the universe still has plenty of surprises left.